Be me, Renee. One more developer in a mid-tier tech company that runs on caffeine and deadlines. Our squad's tiny 4 desks, 4 screens glowing late into the afternoon. I'm the quiet one who just wants to clear the ticket queue and vanish at 5. Louie's the youngest, permanently unimpressed with life, doom-scrolling between commits and narrating his romantic failures like it's a podcast nobody asked for. Houston's the lifer, minimal words, maximum routine. Shows up and leaves at the exact same minute every day, like gravity applies to him differently. There's a weight to the guy, like he's seen every cycle this place goes through. And then Joe Sr., in both age and authority, walking archive of the company's past. If a line of ancient code breaks, it's probably his from a decade ago, and he'll remember exactly why it exists. We don't grab drinks together or trade memes after hours. But when something needs shipping, we lock in like clockwork. The work flows. Houston writes the core logic, rock solid. Joe handles the database integration, a total wizard. Louis picks up the front-end stuff, grumbling but always delivering clean UI. I handle the APIs and middleware, tying it all together. No drama, no pointless meetings. We communicate through Jira tickets and the occasional Slack message. It was a quiet, productive paradise for engineers. Our old manager, a guy named Frank, understood this. He was a former engineer himself. His management philosophy was simple: hire competent people, give them the tools they need, and get out of their way. He'd show up once a week for a stand-up, ask if we had any blockers, and then vanish back into his office to fight corporate battles for us. He retired a few months back. We all wished him well. We had a couple of months of blissful anarchy with no manager at all. Productivity probably went up. Then the email landed in our inboxes, introducing our new engineering team lead, Karina. We all read it. No one said a word. A collective silent sigh passed through the office. The first time we met her was a mandatory meet and greet she scheduled for a Monday morning. She walked into the conference room with a laptop covered in stickers. You know the type. Vague political slogans, logos for non-profits, that sort of thing. She had this incredibly bright, forced smile, the kind of smile that doesn't involve the eyes. She introduced herself, talked about her recent MBA, used a lot of words like synergy, paradigm shift, and holistic workflow. My brain just turned to static. I nodded along, trying to look engaged. Louis was under the table on his phone. Houston was staring at a spot on the wall behind her head. Joe looked like he was peacefully sleeping with his eyes open. She finished her speech by saying she wanted to dismantle the old, toxic, patriarchal structures of the tech world and build a new team culture based on openness, vulnerability, and emotional intelligence. It was at that moment I knew our peaceful days were over. The first week was just observation. She sat in on our stand-ups, taking notes. She scheduled one-on-one meetings with each of us. My meeting was weird. She didn't ask about the project or my workload or my technical skills. She asked me how I felt about my work. I told her it was fine. The work is challenging, which is good. She kept probing. But does it give you a sense of personal fulfillment? Do you feel seen as a person here, not just a resource? I think I just said something like, I get paid to write code. The code works. I'm happy with that. The answer clearly didn't satisfy her. She made a note on her laptop, her smile tightening just a little. I later learned she had similar conversations with everyone. Joe told her he felt like his job was to make sure the servers didn't catch fire, and as long as they were not on fire, he felt fine. Louis apparently told her he felt mostly boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer panic. Houston, in his typical fashion, just said, "It's a job." So, Karina clearly decided we were all emotionally stunted cavemen who needed to be fixed. The following Monday, the fateful calendar invite appeared. Title, Feelings Friday. Time, every Friday, 3:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. Description, a mandatory safe space for the team to decompress and share our emotional journeys. Work talk is discouraged. Let's build a more empathetic and connected team. The 4 of us were in the kitchen getting coffee when it popped up on our phones. Louis was the first to speak. "You have got to be kidding me." Joe just shook his head slowly, a deep, weary sigh escaping him. Houston took a long sip of his black coffee, his face unreadable as stone. It's mandatory. And that was that. The dread began to set in. That first Friday, we all shuffled into the conference room like we were walking to the gallows. Karina was there, looking thrilled. She had arranged the chairs in a circle. There was a box of tissues on the table. She started by saying how excited she was to begin this journey of vulnerability with us. She then shared her own feeling. She felt a little bit of imposter syndrome, but was also empowered by the challenge of reforming a male-dominated space. It was just a string of buzzwords that meant nothing. Then she looked at us. Okay, who wants to go next? Let's go around the circle. Joe, why don't you start? Joe blinked slowly. He looked at Karina, then at the table, then back at Karina. I feel that the air conditioning is a bit too high in here. Karina's smile faltered. Okay, thank you for sharing, Joe. But let's try to dig a little deeper. How was your week, emotionally? It was a week, Joe said, his tone perfectly flat. The database migration is on schedule. No, Joe, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Not about work. About you, Joe just shrugged. I am the database migration right now. It was painful. She moved on to Houston. Houston? What are you feeling? Houston stared at her for a solid 10 seconds without saying anything. Tired, he finally said. Tired? Why are you tired? She pressed, leaning forward like a therapist in a bad movie. Long week, Houston said, and then said nothing more. It was my turn next. I just mumbled something about feeling stressed about a deadline. It was a lie, we were ahead of schedule, but it was the only work-appropriate feeling I could think of. Louis was last. He just looked up from his phone and said, I feel like this meeting could have been an email. Karina's face fell completely. Her little experiment was a total failure. She tried to salvage it, talking for another 20 minutes about the importance of opening up and how real strength is in vulnerability. We all just stared at her, our faces blank. The meeting ended at 5 p.m. on the dot. We filed out in absolute silence. It was the most awkward, cringeworthy 90 minutes of my professional life. We thought maybe she'd get the hint, that she'd realize this was a terrible idea and quietly cancel the meeting series. We were wrong. The next Monday, we got a friendly reminder email from her. The email said she understood that opening up is a process and that it can be scary for men who have been conditioned by society to suppress their emotions. It was so patronizing I could feel my teeth grinding. It ended with, I expect more participation this Friday. This is not optional. The mood in the office that week was tense. We all just kept our heads down and worked. Thursday afternoon, Houston, Joe, Louis, and I all happened to be in the break room at the same time. It was unspoken, but we all knew what we were dreading. Louis was the one who broke the silence. So, what fake feeling is everyone preparing for tomorrow? I'm thinking of going with anxious about the quarterly budget review, I said. Joe grunted. I'm just going to say tired again. Maybe she'll get bored. We all looked at Houston. He was just stirring his coffee, staring into the black liquid. He hadn't said a word. He just seemed darker this week, more withdrawn than usual. He finally looked up, not at us, but at the wall. She wants feelings, he said, his voice low and gravelly. She keeps talking about a safe space to share. We all nodded. All right, he said, turning to look at us, his eyes cold and clear. Let's give her a safe space. Let's give her feelings. There was something in his tone, a shift. It wasn't anger. It was a kind of cold, resigned resolve. He was proposing something, not a protest, not a boycott, malicious compliance. We were going to follow her rules, to the letter. We were going to be open. We were going to be vulnerable. We were going to tell the absolute, unvarnished truth. A slow grin spread across Louis's face. Joe gave a single, slow nod. I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. This was either going to be a stroke of genius, or it was going to get us all fired. The next day we walked into Feelings Friday with a completely different energy. We weren't dreading it anymore. We were ready. Karina seemed to notice the shift. She looked pleased, thinking her passive-aggressive email had worked. So glad to see everyone here, and ready to share, she chirped. She did her usual opening about her own journey. Then she looked around the circle. Who wants to start us off today? Louis raised his hand. Karina looked shocked but delighted. Yes, Louis, please. Louis leaned forward, putting his elbows on the table. He looked Karina dead in the eye. I feel empty, he began. The chipper look on Karina's face started to dissolve. I spent last night on 3 different dating apps, he continued, his voice a flat monotone. I swiped right on probably 500 profiles. I meticulously crafted an opening message for the 6 matches I got. He pulled out his phone. I can show you the data. Of those 6, 4 never responded. 1 responded with LOL. The 6th one, we had a brief conversation. She asked me my height. I told her I'm 5 feet 9 inches. She unmatched me immediately. The room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. So, how do I feel? Louis said, looking around the room. I feel like a piece of meat at a butcher's shop, one that's been sitting out too long and nobody wants. I feel like my value as a human being has been reduced to a few bullet points on a profile, and those bullet points aren't good enough. He paused, taking a breath. I feel a profound sense of loneliness and the creeping suspicion that I am fundamentally unlovable. I also feel like I've wasted hundreds of hours of my life on these apps, time I could have spent learning a skill or doing something productive, all for a tiny dopamine hit of a match that ultimately leads to nothing but rejection. He sat back in his chair. That's how I feel this week, Karina. Thank you for providing this space for me to share. Karina's jaw was literally hanging open. Her face had gone pale. She looked like a child who had asked to see a puppy and had been shown a car crash instead. She stammered. Thank you for your honesty, Louis. That's a lot to process. She tried to recover, falling back on her MBA jargon. It sounds like you're experiencing some negative feedback loops in your social interfacing. Louis just stared at her blankly. She couldn't handle it. She quickly moved on. Okay, who's next? Joe? Joe had been watching the whole exchange with a sort of detached curiosity. He cleared his throat. I feel disconnected, he said, his voice slow and deliberate. My son called me this week. He's in college. He needed money for a new textbook. Karina nodded, looking relieved. This seemed like a more manageable problem. Financial stress is very common, Joe. It's not the money, Joe cut her off, his voice still quiet but with a hard edge. I transferred it to him, of course. But at the end of the call, I asked him how his classes were going, and he said, fine. And I asked if he was enjoying it. He said, it's okay. Then he said he had to go. Joe looked down at his hands on the table. They were the hands of a man who had worked his whole life. The entire conversation lasted 90 seconds, and I realized I don't really know my own son. For 20 years I worked. I took overtime. I worked weekends. I did it all so he and his sister could have everything I didn't. So they could go to a good school, have nice things, not worry about money. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a profound sadness in his eyes. I bought them a life, but I miss living it with them. Now they're grown, and I'm just the guy they call when they need something. I feel like a stranger to my own family. I feel like I spent my entire life working for a goal, and now that I've reached it, I realize I sacrificed the wrong things. He folded his hands. That is my feeling for this week. Now the silence in the room was heavy. It was suffocating. Karina looked like she was about to cry. This wasn't the kind of vulnerability she had read about in her management books. This wasn't, I'm stressed about a presentation. This was real, raw, and deeply uncomfortable. These were the quiet griefs that men carry around every day, the things they never talk about. And we were laying them out on the conference room table, right at her feet. She tried to respond. She said something about quality time and rebuilding bridges. Her voice was thin and shaky. Her corporate platitudes were like paper shields against a tidal wave of real human misery. She didn't even ask me or Houston to share. She couldn't take any more. She looked at the clock. It was only 4:15. You know what, she said, her voice strained. I think we've had a very productive session today. Let's end a little early. Thank you all for your courage. We filed out of the room. The moment the door closed behind us, Louis let out a long, slow breath. No one said a word. We just walked back to our desks. But something had changed. A weird sense of camaraderie hung in the air. We had faced the cringe together, and we had won. We knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. The next week, the atmosphere was different. Karina was avoiding eye contact with us. She communicated mostly through email. When Friday came, we all walked into the conference room with a sense of purpose. It was Houston's turn. All week, he had been even quieter than usual. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Karina started the meeting, but her usual perky demeanor was gone. She just looked tired. She mumbled some opening remarks and then said, "Okay, who wants to share?" Houston spoke up immediately. "I will." He spoke in a low, controlled voice, but the pain in it was palpable. "My wife is leaving me," he said. The statement just hung in the air. Karina flinched. "We're getting a divorce," he continued, looking at the table. "And she wants the house. She wants the kids. She wants half of my pension, and she wants alimony." He took a shaky breath. "Her lawyer sent a letter. They're going to argue that I'm an unfit parent. The reason? Emotional neglect. Because I worked too much. Because I was too focused on my career. The career that paid for the house she wants to kick me out of. The career that paid for the food that fed the children she wants to take from me." He was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "I haven't been able to see my kids. Her lawyer says it's not advisable at this time. Every time I call, she says they're busy. I feel like my life is being dismantled piece by piece by a legal system that sees me as nothing more than a wallet." He looked directly at Karina, and for the first time, there was fire in his eyes. A desperate, cornered animal fire. "I feel like I'm being punished for doing exactly what I was told a good man and a good husband is supposed to do. Provide and protect. And now, I'm losing everything I did it for. I feel helpless, and I feel incredibly, incredibly angry." He stopped, his chest heaving slightly. Karina was speechless. Her face was a mask of horror. This was the ultimate taboo. He was criticizing the system. A man was talking about the injustice he faced in a divorce. This went against everything her ideology taught her. In her world, women were the only victims, men the only aggressors. Houston's raw, undeniable pain shattered that narrative. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There were no buzzwords for this, no corporate-approved solutions. She just sat there in stunned silence as the weight of Houston's confession crushed the air out of the room. It was my turn. I knew I had to follow up on this. I couldn't let the momentum die. "I'd like to share," I said quietly. Karina just nodded, looking dazed. "I feel scared," I said. "Listening to Joe, and Louie, and now Houston. It's terrifying. It feels like a roadmap for my own future," I explained. "I'm doing everything right. I'm saving money. I'm working hard on my career. I'm trying to be a good person. But it feels like the rules have changed and no one gave me the new rule book. It feels like society is a game that's rigged against me as a man, and no matter what I do, I'm destined to lose. I hear Joe's story, and I see my future, a lonely old man who sacrificed his life for a family that sees him as an ATM. I hear Louie's story, and I see my present, the endless demoralizing grind of modern dating where you're disposable. And I hear Houston's story, and I see the end game, the ultimate penalty for trying and failing. You lose everything, your home, your children, your money, your reputation. So, how do I feel, Karina? I feel like I'm walking through a minefield. I'm afraid to get into a serious relationship. I'm afraid to get married. I'm afraid to have kids. Because it feels like the potential risks now far outweigh any possible reward. I feel a deep sense of despair. That's when Karina broke. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I have to take a call," she whispered, her voice cracking. She practically ran out of the room. We just sat there, the four of us, in silence. We had done it. We had followed her rules. We had shared our feelings. And it had destroyed her. We sat there in the ringing silence for what felt like an eternity. The box of tissues Karina had placed so hopefully on the table remained untouched. Eventually, Joe cleared his throat. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "I suppose the meeting is over." We got up and walked out, not even looking at each other. There was nothing to say. We had crossed a point of no return. Karina didn't come back to her desk for the rest of the day. The next week was one of the strangest I've ever experienced at work. It was like living in a ghost story. Karina was physically present, but it was like she wasn't there at all. She stopped coming to our daily stand-ups. She sent emails for everything, even to ask a question to one of us sitting 10 feet away. Her door, which had always been ostentatiously open as a sign of her transparent management style, was now firmly shut. The forced smiles were gone. The chirpy good morning greetings were gone. She would walk to the coffee machine with her eyes fixed on the floor, moving quickly as if she was afraid one of us might try to talk to her. We didn't. We just let her be. We knew she was trapped. She couldn't cancel Feelings Friday. It was her flagship initiative. Canceling it would be a public admission of utter failure to her bosses. But she was also terrified of it, so she tried to change the rules. On Wednesday, another email landed. Subject, Reframing Our Narrative, A Path Forward. The email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It said that now that we had successfully identified our pain points, the next phase of our journey would be to focus on actionable, solutions-oriented ideation. From now on, after sharing a challenge, each person was also required to propose 3 proactive steps to overcome it. It was a desperate attempt to regain control, to steer the conversation back into the shallow, safe waters of management consulting nonsense. Louis read it aloud at his desk in a deadpan voice. When he finished, Houston just said, "Okay," without looking up from his screen. She had no idea what she was dealing with. We weren't just complaining. We were describing fundamental states of being. The problems we had were not things you could solve with 3 proactive steps. That Friday, we walked into the conference room. Karina was already there, looking nervous. She had a whiteboard set up. "Welcome, team," she said, her voice a little too loud. "Ready to focus on solutions?" she asked who wanted to start. We all just looked at her. "Okay," she said. "Louis, how about you? What's your challenge this week, and what are your 3 proactive steps?" Louis looked thoughtful for a moment. "My challenge this week," he began, "is the pervasive feeling of existential dread that comes from the realization that my efforts in the modern dating market are futile and demeaning." Karina's pen hovered over the whiteboard, her smile frozen on her face. "And my 3 proactive steps are as follows," Louis continued, counting them on his fingers. 1. I have deleted all dating apps from my phone. 2. I have reallocated the money I would have spent on dates to upgrading my graphics card. 3. I have accepted that I will likely die alone, and I am choosing to find peace in that. He finished with a polite nod. Karina just stood there, marker in hand. She looked at her whiteboard, then back at Louis. There was nothing she could write down. What was she going to put? Action item, find peace in dying alone? The sheer absurdity of it was overwhelming. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. She didn't even ask anyone else. The solutions-oriented meeting was over before it began. The entire session lasted 12 minutes. Things started to go downhill fast after that. The project, our main focus, started to suffer. The constant tension and the weekly emotional ordeal were draining. It's hard to focus on complex logic when you're preparing for your mandatory group therapy session from hell. We missed a minor deadline. It was the first time our team had ever been late on anything. Karina's response was another email, this time with a passive-aggressive tone, about recommitting to our project goals and maintaining focus. It was a clear attempt to pin the blame on us. At the next Feelings Friday, it was Joe's turn. Karina, looking defeated, just asked, "Joe, challenge, steps." Joe leaned back in his chair. "My challenge is that my manager seems to be implying that our team is responsible for the project slipping." Karina's head snapped up. "My proactive steps are," Joe went on, 1. To point out that dedicating 90 minutes of prime development time every week to a mandatory, non-work-related meeting is inherently counterproductive. 2. To suggest that our time would be better spent actually working on the project. And 3. To document the time lost to these meetings in my weekly report, to show the direct impact on our timeline. This was a direct attack. Joe had taken her solutions framework and turned it into a weapon against her. He was calmly and rationally explaining how her signature policy was causing the very problem she was trying to blame on us. Karina's face went from pale to red. "This meeting is about our feelings, Joe, not about criticizing management," she said, her voice sharp. "I am telling you how I feel," Joe replied, his tone unchanging. I feel that my time is being wasted, and I feel that our team is being set up to fail, and I feel that it is my professional responsibility to address it. Checkmate. Karina had no response. She had built the cage, and now she was trapped in it with us. Any attempt she made to control the situation was immediately dismantled using her own ridiculous rules. By this point, the project was seriously behind. A full week, then a week and a half. Our client was getting antsy. Upper management started asking questions. We knew Karina was getting heat. We could hear her on the phone in her office, her voice high and defensive. She was starting to panic, and a panicking manager is a dangerous manager. We could feel something big was coming. Her final fatal move came in the form of a calendar invite. It was for our next Feelings Friday, but there was another name on the invite list, the Director of Human Resources, a woman who had been with the company for 20 years. She was a no-nonsense old-school HR professional. She came from an era when HR's job was to protect the company from lawsuits, not to talk about emotional journeys. Louis saw the invite and just whispered, "She's calling in an airstrike on her own position." We understood her play immediately. She was desperate. She was going to bring in the head of HR to show off her innovative management technique. Her plan was to portray us as the problem, to say, "Look at this team of broken, emotionally repressed men I have to manage. Look at the incredible work I'm doing to get them to open up." The project is behind because I'm having to do all this emotional labor, not because my ideas are bad. She was going to try to use our honesty as a weapon against us, to paint our pain as a professional deficiency. We knew what we had to do. This wasn't about malicious compliance anymore. This was about survival. That Friday, we walked into the conference room. The HR director was already there, sitting next to Karina. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a polite but firm expression. She had a leather-bound notepad and a pen in front of her. She looked like she was there to conduct an audit, not to share her feelings. Karina started the meeting with a horribly fake, cheerful voice. "Thank you all for coming, and a special welcome to our HR director, who is here to observe the amazing cultural work we're doing on this team." She then gave a 5-minute speech about the importance of vulnerability in the workplace. She used the word brave about a dozen times. The HR director listened patiently, not writing a single note. Then Karina turned to us, a predatory gleam in her eye. "So team, let's show our guest how much progress we've made. Who would like to share their feelings and challenges today?" The silence was heavy. We had all decided on our strategy beforehand. I was to be the one to speak first. I took a breath and raised my hand. "I'd like to share," I said. Karina beamed. "Excellent, Renee. Please." I looked directly at the HR director, not at Karina. "I feel," I started, keeping my voice calm and professional, "an increasing amount of anxiety and stress, not from my work, but from these mandatory meetings." The HR director's pen started moving. "I feel that this forum, under the guise of being a safe space, is actually creating a hostile and deeply uncomfortable work environment." Karina's smile vanished. "I have been compelled, as a condition of my employment, to listen to my colleagues discuss profoundly personal and distressing issues, such as the painful details of their divorces, their struggles with loneliness, and their intimate family problems. These are not topics that are appropriate for the workplace." I continued, not breaking eye contact with the HR director. "Furthermore, I feel that my own privacy is being violated. I am being forced to either invent a feeling to satisfy my manager or to disclose personal information that I do not wish to share with my colleagues or my superiors. This puts me and my teammates in an impossible position." I paused for a moment. This initiative has also had a direct and negative impact on our productivity. As of this morning, our team has spent over 20 cumulative hours in these non-work-related meetings. That is half a week of development time for one person. It is a primary contributor to our current project delays. Finally, I delivered the killing blow. Frankly, I am worried about the legal implications. Forcing employees to discuss personal matters, some of which could be related to mental health or legal disputes, feels like a massive liability for the company. I feel that my manager's policy is exposing both the employees and the company to unnecessary risk. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. The HR director was writing furiously in her notepad. She did not look up. Karina looked like she had been slapped. Her face was ashen. Before she could even respond, Houston spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying immense weight. "I would like to add to that." All eyes turned to him. He also addressed the HR director directly. "As some of you know, I am currently going through a contentious divorce. These meetings have forced me to discuss details of an active legal proceeding in front of my colleagues. My lawyer has strongly advised me that this is highly inappropriate and has recommended that I formally document every instance where I have been pressured to share personal legal or medical information at work." That was it. The silver bullet, the word lawyer, the word document. The HR director's pen stopped moving. She slowly put it down on her notepad. She looked up, first at Houston, with a flicker of what looked like actual empathy, and then she turned her gaze to Karina. The look she gave her was one of pure, unadulterated ice. "Karina," the HR director said, her voice dangerously calm, "could you please step outside with me for a moment?" It wasn't a request. Karina stood up on wobbly legs. She looked utterly defeated. She didn't even look at us as she followed the HR director out of the room. The conference room door clicked shut, leaving the four of us alone. We didn't cheer. We didn't even smile. We just sat there, breathing. Through the glass wall of the conference room, we could see the execution. We couldn't hear the words, but we didn't need to. The HR director was talking, her expression severe. She wasn't yelling. She was calm, which was somehow more terrifying. Karina was just standing there, taking it. Her shoulders were slumped. She looked at one point like she was trying to argue, but the HR director held up a hand, and Karina fell silent immediately. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes. Then the HR director gave a final, sharp nod, turned, and walked away down the hall. Karina stood alone in the hallway for a long time, just staring at the wall. Then she turned and walked, not back to her office, but towards the elevators. We never saw her again. The next morning, there was an email from the HR director waiting in our inboxes. It was brief and to the point. Effective immediately, the Feelings Friday initiative is discontinued. A review of departmental management practices is underway. In the interim, Joe will be acting as team lead. Please direct all project-related queries to him. A quiet sense of relief washed over the office. The spell was broken. That afternoon, Joe called a meeting. Our first real meeting in months. He stood at the head of the table. "All right," he said. "We're 2 weeks behind schedule. Here's how we're going to fix it." He laid out a clear, logical, and ambitious plan. For the next 30 minutes, we talked about code, deadlines, and technical solutions. It was glorious. We left that meeting feeling energized for the first time in a long time. We had our purpose back. A week later, we were completely caught up on the project. We delivered the final product ahead of the revised schedule. The client was thrilled. The company officially made Joe our permanent manager. He was given a modest raise in our old manager Frank's office. His management style was, unsurprisingly, exactly what we needed. He left us alone to do our jobs. The four of us. We're still not friends. We don't go bowling on the weekends. But something is different. There's a new level of respect between us, a shared understanding. We went through something together. We faced a common, absurd enemy and won. A few weeks after everything settled down, Joe sent a one-line message in our team's Slack channel after work on a Friday. "Bar across the street. First round's on me." We all went. We sat at a small table in the corner of the crowded pub. We didn't talk about work. We didn't talk about feelings. We mostly just sat in a comfortable silence watching the game on the TV. After a while, Houston raised his glass. We all looked at him. "To work," he said. We all raised our glasses and clinked them together. To work. It was all that needed to be said.